Thank you, Peter. I'm really excited for this session. It's not a typical team session. We are in a team-specific event, but we're going to be talking about security, about using Azure Sentinel to secure your environment, and more specifically, teams. So the goal of this session is to give an introduction into what Azure Sentinel is and how it can integrate with Microsoft Teams. So let's just get started right away. As Peter already introduced me, my name is Thijs Lecomte. I'm a Microsoft 365 consultant working in Belgium. I work for a Microsoft partner called The Collective Consulting, where I'm focusing on security, endpoint management, and automation. I'm a current MVP in the Enterprise Mobility award category, so that's mainly for my Intune contributions. If you want to see my contributions and see what I'm up to, you can follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn. But I also have a blog, 365 by Thijs, and I'm also the technical editor for the Microsoft 365 Security for the IT Pro book. So most of you will probably know the Office 365 IT Pro book. This is related to it, but it's specific to the security suite. So this is a monthly an ebook with monthly updates, which contains everything you need to know about Microsoft 365 security. So let's dive into it. Thijs, why the hell you're giving a session about Azure Sentinel within a Teams Nation, a Teams only event? What is going on? Why should I care about this? Well, I'm actually glad 50 of you joined the session. Because it does mean you're interested in securing your team's environment. And you're wondering maybe, how should I do this? Well, what is Azure Sentinel? Well, it was a product first introduced in 2019, if I'm not mistaken, in public preview. And it's Microsoft's first SIEM and SOAR product. So a SIEM, the literal meaning is a security information and events management system. A SOAR as a security orchestration and automation and response. So what do they mean? Well, a SIEM is essentially a place for you to send your logs. This could be logs from your AV and EDR systems, your firewalls, but also applications you want to monitor. And with these logs, you will monitor for specific events happening inside of your environment, to be aware of everything that has happened, certain events that you want to be notified for, or just want to investigate the events happening on a use case basis to do proactive hunting. We also have the SOAR capability, which means automated response. If you have a fully fledged SIEM in place or you're already using Azure Sentinel, you will know that it can be a hassle to really go through each event manually. It can be a lot of manual work. This is why we have the SOAR component, which means we can automate some of the responses through Azure Logic Apps. Azure Sentinel might not be for everybody. You might already have a SIEM in place, which could replace all of the features Azure Sentinel offers. Why do I like / love Azure Sentinel? It's because of the integration with Azure resources. It's built entirely on top of existing Azure resources, and it integrates so well into the other Microsoft components. For example, the audit logs for Teams, but also Azure Identity Protection, the whole security stack. It's all an integrated feature, which is a great way to monitor your cloud environment. But the product team is also doing heavy investments into monitoring your on-premises environment and having feature parity with other SIEM systems such as Splunk. So I talked about that Azure Sentinel is built on top of native Azure solutions, but how does it look like? Well, at the center of Azure Sentinel, we have a log analytics workspace. You might know already a log analytics workspace. It's used within Security Center. It's used to monitor virtual machines. It's used with update compliance, application insights, also uses it. So it's essentially a log collector. What you can do is you can send logs to it or ingest logs in Azure Sentinel, and you will have different tables from different products. Within each table, you will have specific columns to that table, and then each row as an event. So what we can do is, for example, we could send data from our virtual machines to monitor the CPU and disk space for that virtual machines, or we can, of course, send data from Microsoft Teams to Log Analytics. So Log Analytics has different solutions that you can enable. Solutions enable more use cases, more features on the existing Log Analytics workspace. One of those solutions is Azure Sentinel, and that provides you extra flexibility and enables the SIM component on top of a Log Analytics workspace. So if you want to start building out your Azure Sentinel environment, what do you have to start with? Of course, this is data collection. You have to have some kind of logs within your SIM system to be able to monitor them. As I told you before, Microsoft integrates very well with the native built-in Microsoft products. So Teams, Azure AD, Azure Web Application Firewall. It's all really easy to integrate, but we're also adding a bunch of data connectors from other products such as Jira or Cisco to really easily ingest those logs. After you have ingested those logs, of course, you have to do something with them. I see a lot of customers just throwing every possible log inside of Azure Sentinel, but that doesn't make sense. You have to have added value for these logs to make sure that you are doing something with them. So what can you do within Azure Sentinel? Well, we can do detection and investigation. Inside of your Azure Sentinel environment, you can create alert rules. And with alert rules, we can create queries which will generate a alert or incident when a noteworthy event happens. So this is really something you want to be alerted for when a user account is breached. You want to receive an alert to know, okay, I should investigate. Is this a true positive? And should I take any actions to make sure that the user isn't breached anymore? One of the buzzwords in 2020 and 2021 is hunting, advanced hunting. It's also in the line of zero trust and assume breach. What it means is, well, you can have the alert rules set up, but you might miss some things. You might not be alerted for everything that could be a breach. Well, with hunting, proactive hunting, we are not waiting for an alert to be generated. We are actively looking into the data. For example, team specific, you would look into a user has been added to a team. Imagine a user from the R&D department is added to the marketing team. Well, that does sound a little bit weird. You want to investigate it. You want to look into the data. Maybe you see that he has a identity protection alert with a sign in it. Before that, you're connecting all the dots, and from there on, you could find a breach. Luckily, you don't have to put up all the logic yourself. Azure Sentinel also provides machine learning and artificial intelligence, such a buzzword again, but it will look for anomalies within your environment and provide its own logic on top of the logic you already built. And then if you report to your manager, they do love pretty pictures, pretty reports. For that, we have workbooks. With workbooks, we can visualize the data so that you can present it to your management. You can also create workbooks not related to security incidents, but just built on top of the data. For example, a team-specific workbook to show you how many teams have been created in the past couple of months, how many teams were created by a IT administrator, how many by user. You can create your own reports. Some of these reports are also possible, of course, through the Teams Admin Center, but with workbooks, you can generate everything yourself and provide the data that you want to look into. If we have all those alerts, well, it will be a hassle, but we have to investigate them all. So this can be a lot of work, but you have to investigate the incidents and alerts coming in. Why do I say it's a hassle? Well, because I see a lot of customers just creating alert rule after alert rule, but not really giving a thought what is the added value here and how will I investigate it. Because if you throw an alert and you don't investigate it, well, there's no use case. So you should build your own use cases to make sure you provide your added value to Azure Sentinel. As I said before, you can also automate some of the investigations, which is done through Azure Logic Apps. Azure Logic Apps are also known as playbooks within Azure Sentinel. If you don't know Logic Apps, you're probably familiar with Power Automate or Flow. Well, Power Automate or Flow is meant to automate business processes, really user-bound. For example, if a user receives a response to a form he created, he wants to receive a mail or notification on his phone, well, that's a Power Automate flow. But if you're really talking about automating some backend infrastructure, for example, to do your user creation process, well, this is something you can do with Azure Logic Apps. If you have more advanced capabilities that you need, you can also look into Azure Functions, which is just a PowerShell, a JavaScript, or a Python script that you can execute from the Azure portal. But unfortunately, this is not that well integrated into Azure Sentinel. So just a general introduction, you have data collection on one side, you put the data and set up log analytics, you will create queries or hunts on it, and then you will respond to the data, to the incidents. You can respond manually or automatically through Azure Logic Apps or playbooks. So instead of only talking and showing you a slide, let's just dive into the portal. Here at the top, you will see Azure Sentinel. Of course, if you're used to Azure, you will also be able to search at the top and you will find Azure Sentinel. Here I have a few Azure Sentinel workspaces. To give you an example, I have the TC Test Sentinel. As I have said before, Sentinel is built on top of Log Analytics. So if we go to the Log Analytics workspaces, for every Sentinel solution, we will also see the underlying Log Analytics workspace where the data is kept and retained. So let's go to our Log Analytics workspace, to our Sentinel workspace, my apologies. I will open our test workspace here, and this provides you an overview of everything happening within your Azure Sentinel environment. It's just a general introduction. How many data are you ingesting? How many alerts and incidents are you generating? To provide a management overview. So the first step, as I said before, it's important to look into ingesting data into Azure Sentinel. So this is done through the data connectors tab. So if we go here, these are all the natively built-in data connectors for Azure Sentinel. We have the Microsoft specific ones, such as Azure AD, Identity Protection, Azure Defender, but we also have some third-party ones, such as Jira, Aruba. We also have some Cisco in here, a little bit down. So there's really a nice mix between Microsoft connectors and third-party connectors. I often hear Azure Sentinel is only useful for Microsoft, for the cloud. Well, there are a lot of native connectors focusing on it, but the Azure Sentinel team is heavily investing into also generating third-party on-premises connectors to really easily ingest data. It's not that if a data connector is not here in this list, it's not possible to ingest the data inside of Azure Sentinel. The beautiful thing is it's a cloud product. There are APIs for it. So even files, just this regular flat files, you can ingest that into Azure Sentinel and have the data available. But of course, we're here to talk also about Teams. So to ingest data from Teams into Azure Sentinel, there is a connector called Office 365. If we open that connector, we can see the configuration of that Office 365 connector. This specific connector is split up into different record types. So we have, I might enlarge this because it might be too small for you guys. we have Exchange, SharePoint, and Teams. So you can choose which data you want to ingest and which you don't want to ingest. So for example, if you only care about Teams, well, you can leave Exchange not ticked on and tick Teams. I don't have permission on this workspace. I'm not a global or security administrator as of now, so I cannot show you the process, but it's really easy. It's ticking the box of Teams and applying it. That's the beautiful part of Azure Sentinel. It's integrated. You tick Teams, apply changes, and data will be flowing in. If we take a look inside of the logs, so here, if we click on logs, we will go to the raw logs that Azure Sentinel is ingesting. Within the Azure Sentinel, there is a table called Office Activity. If we call that table, and for example, take the first 10 rows, 10 events, if we execute this query, we will see a few Exchange-specific ones because I have not ingested Teams at the moment. And here you can look into the data into what's happening. We have the Office workload column. So you can filter on that, and you could say where Office workload equals Teams. Of course, I don't have any data as of now, but the same would suffice for Exchange. Let me, if I can type. Yes. So here we have all the Exchange data. It might be confusing at first because there's so many rows, so many columns. It's often hard to look into how should I be handling these logs? How should I learn these logs? Well, the easy thing also, everything is integrated through GUI. So if you click on a column, you could say, for example, I want to only see events from the collective test environment. I click include, and then it's filtered. It's really easy to do at first if you're just starting out. If you have the logs, you can create analytic rules to create incidents based on certain events. If an incident is created, you will see it here in the overview. We'll go, within a couple of minutes, we'll go deeper into logging and creating your own analytic rules. If you want to visualize data, as I said before, we have workbooks. Workbooks are really to show your manager what's going on. And to visualize the data, instead of showing him raw logs, you can create a nice graph or a nice query to show what the data is inside of Azure Sentinel. So this is just a generic introduction into Azure Sentinel. I'll now go back to the PowerPoint to show you some of the use cases we have to connect Microsoft Teams and Azure Sentinel together. Then we'll go back into the portal to show you how you can integrate Teams with Azure Sentinel and what the use cases are. So let's dive into it. First, of course, not unimportant is pricing. You need to be aware of how the Azure Sentinel prices are calculated. Well, they're calculated per ingested gigabyte. So every gigabyte of data you put inside of Azure Sentinel, you pay for. If you want to retain the data, so for example, by default, Teams audit logs is, I think, kept for 90 or 30 days. If you want to keep it longer, for example, for a year, you can increase the retention of your Sentinel environment, but you have to pay, of course, for the retention. But it's important to know if you're using Azure Sentinel, you pay for the ingestion inside of Log Analytics, which is the underlying component. And then you also pay for the ingestion into Azure Sentinel, because Log Analytics, you pay for putting data in the workspace. Azure Sentinel, you pay to reason over that data and use the machine learning capabilities to investigate that data. If you're using the Azure Sentinel calculator, the generic Azure cost calculator, it will take into account those two separate costs. But it's just important to know within cost management of your Azure subscription, you will see those two entries. Because it's a Microsoft product, they of course want to promote other Microsoft products. So some of the ingestion of Microsoft products is free. For example, Azure AD audit logs are free, but also Exchange and SharePoint. Unfortunately, as we have seen, the Office data connected exists of 3 different workloads: Exchange, SharePoint, and Teams. And ingesting Teams data is not free at the moment. So it's just something to take into account when you're developing your environment. Then also important is that Azure Sentinel uses other Azure resources as well, such as logic apps to automate response, and machine learning to ingest raw machine learning if you want that into Azure. These are not included in the Azure Sentinel cost. It's built separately. So now that we have a generic overview of what Azure Sentinel is, let's dive into how can we combine Azure Sentinel with Microsoft Teams. Well, in my opinion, there are 2 different big blocks of use cases. On the one hand, we can monitor Azure Sentinel. We can monitor Teams with Azure Sentinel, so to be able to alert it when something happens within your Teams environment. But we also have automated response, because as I said before, Azure Sentinel uses logic apps to automate response. We can really easily interact with Teams through these logic apps. So let's dive into the monitoring part first. What are the use cases? Well, one of the use cases is within Teams, you have the ability to set some hard policies. So this means, for example, blocking guests or not allowing to a member of a team cannot add a new member. This has to be done by an owner. When you're setting up your Microsoft Teams environment, you should be aiming for hard policies, really configuring so that the user is not allowed to do so. But as you know, it's not always possible to configure a hard policy inside of the service. You might have different requirements or use cases that you have built up yourself, and it's not natively possible. Well, these are some awesome use cases to start monitoring with Azure Sentinel. To give you an example, if you're a large company, your management team probably has its own dedicated Microsoft Teams. They might be allowed to invite guests into that team because they have to, the board members are from an external company, they are a guest account inside of your environment, so you should invite the guest. Well, okay, they can invite the guests all they want, but if it's your management team, you should be really looking into, one, is the manager making a mistake, adding something that he should not, or is an account of a management user breached, and will he add an account which isn't supposed to be there? So these are some real great use cases to monitor those highly privileged teams to make sure nothing happens that you do not want to happen. Of course, besides that, you should always look into what is out of the ordinary. It's possible that a user deletes a team. Well, and if he deletes one team, I don't really care, he can do that. But if this user never deletes a team and suddenly starts to delete 5 teams in 5 minutes, well, okay, this could indicate maybe an attacker trying to have impact on the organization, trying to delete data. This might be something that you want to investigate. So these are some use cases that you can use Azure Sentinel to monitor your team's environment. Besides monitoring, we also have automated response. So with logic apps, we can automate a notification for a new incident. Automatically take action from Teams on a incident generated. I have a nice example to show you in a little bit. And of course, Teams bots. Within our company, the collective, we also run a SOC, and that SOC is entirely based on Azure Sentinel. We sometimes have use cases where we want to ask a user a quick question. For example, just a informational incident. A user logs in from Italy, but normally he logs in from Belgium. This is something that you might be want to alert it for, but it's stupid to go to the IT person and let the IT person ask the user if he was in Italy. Well, you can build a Teams bot to ask that. And then depending on the answer of that user, you can automatically close or escalate the incident to make sure you have the appropriate response. Of course, I wouldn't recommend this for really high severity alerts or incidents, because if a user account is breached and you ask the question to a user, are you breached? And the attacker says no, well, there's no point. So you have to be careful with how you use bots and integrate it with Azure Sentinel. So these are the two use cases. Let's now dive into each one of them a little bit deeper to show you some examples of how we can do it. First of all, Teams monitoring. How do you start with it? Well, as said before, it's important to distinguish between monitoring and creating incidents on specific use cases, and hunting, looking proactively into the data, what is happening in the environment, and am I seeing something interesting? The first thing you have to look into is, what are my use cases? What are my business requirements? Because you might be interested because of the session inside of Azure Sentinel, and you might set it up, and you might ingest the Teams data inside of Sentinel. But if you have no valid use case, no business reason to do so, it's just an additional cost that you might want to forget about. So it's important that within your organization, you decide, we want to monitor this and that. We should be alerted for X, Y, Z. And these are the use cases you have to define. And then you can start out building your own queries. Now, how can we build our own queries and where do we do it? Well, let's dive just inside of the Azure portal. When you're inside of the Azure Sentinel portal, you can go to the configurations tab and then analytics. Within analytics, we have the active rules, which are the rules that are currently active for this environment. But we also have the templates. Templates are Microsoft provided templates, which are a great place to start. What you can do is, within data sources, you can see on which data sources the rules are based. So for example, we know Teams is within the Office 365 data connector. We can select Office 365 and only get the rule templates which are applicable to Office. Of course, these are mostly Exchange specific rules. But for example, there's one rule template here, multiple teams deleted by a single user. If you're interested in it, you can click create rule and everything is filled in. You can see what the rule is doing. So if we look into the query, a query is always built in KQL. KQL is the Kusto query language. It's the language built by Microsoft. People often compare it to SQL, to SQL, but it's a really easy language to learn and to be aware of. It's a huge language because it's used in CM pivots and application insights and Azure Sentinel and log analytics. So it's a really nice language to have in your tool bag, but it's also really, really readable. So what is this rule doing? Well, it's going inside of the log and the Office activity. We only care about Microsoft Teams, so we will only show events related to Microsoft Teams. Then we can filter on the operation. Here we do team deleted, but this could also be team created or something else. And then with this, we have all the events when a team was deleted. If you want, you could receive an incident each time a team is deleted, but that's probably something you do not want. You want to do smart things with Sentinel. Do not overburden yourself with incidents and alerts. Try to do small things and think, when does that make sense to generate? This is where the rest of the query comes in. So here we will combine all the logs per user, and we will check how many teams were deleted, and is that above our threshold? The threshold we have configured here. So this is the threshold of 3. So if a user deletes more than 3 teams within 24 hours, you will receive an incident. This is a great place to start. You can change up the threshold to make it 5, to make it 10. But what I love to do is to make it dynamic. what you can do with Azure Sentinel, it has some great query language with Custo query language, and you can say, you can check what the previous activity is of a user. For example, if he deletes 5 teams every day, well, that's not something I want to receive an incident for. But if he deletes 5 teams every day and suddenly on day 6 he deletes 30 of them, well, that's something you want to be alerted on, something you want to investigate. So these are things you have to take into account when creating your own query rules. The sky is the limit with Sentinel and Custo. It's just a matter of building your own use cases. So if you go back to the rule wizard, let me use it here. Yes. So everything is filled in. You can see it's being run every day. If you then go to review and create, you can create the query and then it will be created. So from this time on, it will run each day to check certain events. So these are the analytics rules. We also have hunting rules. So hunting rules do not generate alerts, but just a great way to check ad hoc for certain things, to look into, hey, I have received this alert. Let me look into what's happening in Teams. I have received a weird sign-in. Does the user have any activity within Microsoft Teams? Well, here within the hunting, there is also some templates available. We can also filter on data sources of this activity, and we can see some team-specific things as well. So if you're just starting out with Azure Sentinel, the templates are a great place to start. But if you want to go a little bit further, I highly recommend the Azure Sentinel community. It's built on top of GitHub, and it's just available through community, this button here. And this is the official Microsoft GitHub for Azure Sentinel. So here we have things that Microsoft is creating, but also queries that the community creates. So this is a great place if you're just starting out and want to see, has anybody else done this? Because, well, if somebody else has done it, you don't have to put in the work to create it yourself, of course. This is why we have the community. And so we have detections, which are the analytic rules, and we have hunting queries, which are the hunting queries we see here. So if we look into, for example, hunting queries, it's filtered again per data source. So here we have office activity, and we have the different hunting queries available inside of GitHub. Some of the GitHub queries might overlap with the queries available in the portal, but the GitHub is most of the time more extensive than the portal. If we look into an interesting one, we have, for example, the multi-team owner. If we click on it, it's just a configuration file. What you have to do then is you have to take this query, copy it, go to the Azure Sentinel portal again, new query, and then you can put up the query here and it will check. And now you have copied essentially something from GitHub to your own Sentinel environment to test with, and you can also update this. So this is again a great rule to start with. If he becomes a user of 10 teams at a time, might be a breach, an attacker trying to get more of a foothold inside of your environment and escalate privileges to get more and more information to have a bigger impact if he does a ransomware, for example. So this was just a small introduction into detection rules and hunting rules. What we also, of course, have is the automated response. I love automated response with Azure Sentinel. I actually have an entire session on it on another event, but they're so powerful. What I'm going to show you now is a GIF. This is something that was created by a Microsoft engineer. I'll put up the Twitter of the engineer in the chat afterwards. What he has built is essentially a set of logic apps that will synchronize incidents from Azure Sentinel to ServiceNow, but it will also enable you to view both the Sentinel and the ServiceNow incidents from Microsoft Teams, and also provides a SOC analyst the capability to take actions on side of incidents from within Microsoft Teams. So I'm going to play the GIF right now. So here he is triggering the playbook manually. This could also be done automatically. So we run the playbook. If we then go to Teams, you will see there is a new pop-up, which from here on out, we can go to the Sentinel incident and the ServiceNow incident. But we also have the request to run a playbook. If you submit this, automatically in the background, the playbooks will run and automated actions will follow. So this is a really great way to work from your SOC through Microsoft Teams. This is not something that, of course, every organization should do, but it's a really nice example of how powerful the integration between Azure Sentinel and Microsoft Teams is. So how do we even begin with automating? Well, if we go back to the portal and you go to Logic Apps, you can create your own Logic Apps. If we create a new one, I think I have an empty one here, so let's try this. Okay, it doesn't seem to be empty. Wrong name. Let me just quickly create a new one. So if we create a new one, you'll be able to see how a Logic Apps looks like and how you can begin creating it. Because in a Logic App, there are two kind of steps. We have triggers and we have actions. A trigger means when is the Logic App running. An action means what is the Logic App executing. So for example, we have a blank Logic App here. If we search for Azure Sentinel, there are a few possibilities here. We have when an alert was triggered and when an incident was triggered. So these are the two choices that you have if you want to automatically trigger a Logic App from Azure Sentinel. You should decide, should it be for every alert or for every incident? Because an alert, an incident can have multiple alerts, and an incident is something you want to investigate. Sometimes an alert doesn't have an incident attached to it, so it just might be something informational. For example, if you have an unfamiliar sign-in property alert, that's an alert, something you do not want to investigate, but you could run a playbook to see, is that a malicious IP? If it's a malicious IP, I do want to create an incident for it. So these are the capabilities that you have. So these are really Sentinel specific. We then have a few steps, for example, to easily add a comment, change the status of an incident, all kind of things that are really easy to do, integrated from Logic Apps. This is the main benefit from Logic Apps. You do not have to call every separate API. It's all built in. And of course, we also have some Teams connectors. So if we look into Microsoft Teams, the search is working great. Here we have Teams. These are the capabilities we have. So we can create our own teams from Logic Apps, but what I love is, for example, to post a message or to post a choice as a flow bot. And this is what we saw in the GIF. So the Logic Apps post a choice that the user can react to. And then the Logic App will take that response from the user and use it in his later execution to really use the choice that the user has given you and let the user interact with Azure Sentinel from Microsoft Teams. Now, this is just to give you an example. And of course, this is again a business decision how you want to use it. We ourselves, we use Jira as our ITSM tool. But what we do use is if a SLA would be breached, so we have an SLA for each incident. If an SLA would be breached, we will receive a Teams notification, which is all done through Logic Apps. And if nobody responds to that Teams notification, well, we will be called, we will be alerting the on-call person through Logic Apps as well to make sure that he will investigate that specific alert. The unfortunate thing here is that there is no template available for Logic Apps. So we can here see the playbooks. These are playbooks I created, but compared to analytics tools, there is no templates here. But again, what is a beautiful thing of the community? Somebody has already done it before. So if we go to Azure Sentinel, We can go to playbooks, and here we can see all the playbooks that have been created. If you search for teams, well, there are a few things. For example, when an identity protection alert is generated, send a response as a Teams bot. So these are some cool places to start with to really look into how is it working, and you can use the work from the community to create your own use cases. So we're nearing the end of my session, but I want to provide a small summary and then have some time for Q&A. What should you remember from my session? What is something I want you to take with you? I think Azure Sentinel can provide value to every organization out there. Excuse me. It's a great tool to use. And the beautiful thing is it's also integrated with different Microsoft first tools, such as Microsoft Teams, Logic Apps. Is so easily integrated that if you want to ingest data, the audit log from Teams, it's with 2 clicks, you can have the data available within Azure Sentinel to start monitoring them. I have touched a lot on the Azure Sentinel community. It's a really big community. I love being part of this community. And within GitHub, if you're just starting out, it's a great way to learn how to start out with Azure Sentinel. It can be daunting at first because there's so many moving parts, but with help of the Azure Sentinel community, you can easily start off and then go further. Besides that, I'm a big proponent of automation. It's a really powerful tool. You should try to automate as much as possible, because if you automate all of your tasks, you don't have that much work and you can look into other things, for example, the proactive hunting. And last but not least, what I think is the most important thing to take into account, you should have a business use case for everything. You should think about what you want to do and think about how it should integrate with the rest of your business. Don't just throw every log out there inside of Azure Sentinel, because you will pay a lot of money. Microsoft is not handing out freebies. You have to pay for everything within the Azure environment. So make sure you think about, what data do I want to have? What do I want to do to it? And how do I want to respond to it? Certainly that last part is so important, because if you have no clue how you will respond to an incident, well, then why do you need the incident? So with those 4 takeaways, I really hope that you have an idea of what Azure Sentinel is, but how it also integrates with Microsoft Teams and how you can use Azure Sentinel to secure Microsoft Teams. So I do hope that you have enjoyed the session. I would really, really appreciate if you would provide some feedback about the session. This could be in the Q&A or in chat just, or through this form, because it really helps me improve my sessions and know what I should be focusing on next. I don't know if there are any questions that you want to ask through the chat, or if the question is too long, maybe you could write in chat and Peter could unmute you for a second so we can have a small conversation.